Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef and I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids and passionate about helping more women to understand and accept their amazing ADHD brains. After speaking to many women just like me and probably you, I know there is a need for more health and lifestyle support for women newly diagnosed with ADHD. In these conversations, you'll learn from insightful guests, hear new findings and discover powerful perspectives and lifestyle tools to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm and purposeful life wherever you are on your ADHD journey. Here's today's episode. So hi everyone, welcome back to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef, your host, and today we are talking a big topic and actually something we've not touched on the podcast before, and it's all about social anxiety and ADHD. And I'm delighted to say that I have an expert in this area, and it's Mita Mystery, and she is a columnist, a mindfulness-based cognitive therapist, acupuncturist, and now an author. She's got a fantastic new book out, and she works with those who are affected by trauma and delivers mental health and trauma education to schools, doctors, hospitals, and organisations, and I think also one-to-one clients as well. So I'm just delighted to have you here, Mita, because I think what your book is about, it can be so helpful for so many people, but especially in the neurodivergent community. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for having me on.
So your book is called How to Understand and Deal with Social Anxiety. And I know that from speaking to so many people with ADHD, it's there. But for someone that's listening to this podcast, maybe they're new, maybe they're sort of still discovering ADHD themselves. What is social anxiety? And I guess, how does it show up for people?
Yeah, okay. It's again, like you say, it's very, very common. It's the third largest mental health condition, disorder, whatever you want to call it. But a lot of people don't recognize it. So social anxiety is actually the fear of being humiliated, rejected, or embarrassed in front of a group of people or just in front of people. So what it does is it creates this really intense fear, nervousness and overwhelm inside your body. So it might be that you have an event that you have to go to, or you're going to be meeting some new people, and you suddenly start to fear the worst case scenario, that you're going to say something really ridiculous and you're going to come across really unwell. And then it starts to affect your body because your stress response kicks in. So you might start to feel shaky in your legs, nauseous, sweating, just generally feeling unwell, like you can't cope with that social interaction. So you then avoid it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, first of all, when you described that straight away kind of interlinks with rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is so prevalent with ADHD. And that is exactly, so now I'm being able to make that connection that it can manifest as a social anxiety as well and, live in our body. I mean, I have 100% experienced this, with public speaking, making a presentation, the thought of speaking in public. Something else that used to come up for me, and I'm just wondering if this is part of social anxiety, is I used to blush like really, really badly as a child. And I just always, if I spoke up in class, if I spoke up in a work environment, I could feel this like rush of heat, and it would just it would be like a beacon of red, to the point where people would be like, oh my goodness, Kate, are you okay? Which then was kind of like a fulfilling prophecy of me not putting my hand up and not wanting to speak. Is that quite common with social anxiety, like sort of extreme blushing?
Yeah, absolutely. So any sort of blushing, changes to your physical appearance can actually be quite off-putting as well in engaging in those interactions, because you think that everybody is going to notice it, when actually most people don't notice it. It might be just, so in our own minds, when somebody has social anxiety, the actual fear of coming across unwell or that nervousness being spotted is a lot more amplified than it actually is in real life. But all, like you say, by thinking those things, we actually start to sweat more and blush more. And then we actually start to fulfill that prophecy. So it's almost like we make it happen. Our worst case scenarios do or can come true. So we need to recognize when we are starting to feel anxious, because really social anxiety is really about your thoughts. It's your thoughts spiraling out of control about something going horribly wrong, about you being rejected, not being accepted. And actually that is often, more often than not, far from the actual reality of how you do come across to people, how you're perceived.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally again relate because, when we've got ADHD, we live in our heads and we're constantly, there thinking about all the what if scenarios, the ruminating, the catastrophizing, constantly thinking the worst. And, from now understanding from a neuroscience perspective, we've got something called the DMN in our brain, which is the default mode network. And we, as people with ADHD, are more, we have it, it's like a louder, more kind of powerful version of it in our head. So we are always seeing it's the hypervigilance, it's that danger that we're always kind of alerted to. And that's the stress levels in our body are always there. So I can now understand, social anxiety is just part and parcel of that because we're always catastrophizing and thinking, the worst. So you talked about thought, and I know that you're a CBT therapist. How can we use CBT to help ourselves? Like our ADHD, we know we're born with it. We're often undiagnosed for, decades of our life. And we are now in a time of our life where we may be higher up in our career. We may be older, wiser. We've gone through the mill a little bit. How can we now, with the awareness of ADHD, utilize CBT and any other techniques to help ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. So I think once you recognize that actually anxiety is really just your thoughts, which then have an impact on your body. So you have physical changes in your body because of your thoughts. So when you start to recognize those thought patterns popping up, so if you notice a negative thought pop up, if you're able to catch it and stop it from spiraling out of control, so stop you from ruminating, that's what CBT effectively is about stepping back from those thoughts and actually putting more helpful thoughts in place. So if you think about it, it's not our fault really, because we think around 70,000 thoughts a day. And we're on autopilot 46.9% of the time, which means a lot of our thoughts are just happening automatically. And our brain is designed in a way to protect us from danger, like you were saying. So our fear center, our amygdala is slightly enlarged, and something that isn't even threatening will be perceived as a threat, and then it will kick off all the systems in the body, start you sweating, the blushing, all the rest of it. But if we know that and we can recognize that actually these are my thoughts, when this negative thought pops up, it can take me down this whole rabbit hole where I'm going to feel so bad and not end up doing these situations, not going into this presentation, not going to this event. Or I can start to really help myself and really sort of start catching that thought and reframing it and saying, no, actually, that's not the reality. And this is where mindfulness is also helpful as well. So once you start catching these negative thoughts and reframing them, and sort of breathing to sort of calm down the body's response to it, you're more able to take a rational, more helpful approach rather than being led by your thoughts, rather than react. You're in a better position. You have more power to respond rather than react to what your thoughts are telling you, which often are not really the reality of the situation.
Yeah. It's so helpful to know that we do have something quite simple to fall back on. And I think with, speaking from an ADHD perspective, we have this innate feeling that we're never living up to our potential. And I know from speaking to lots of people that it's there because, throughout life we've been undiagnosed. We've not quite understood why certain things have been more challenging for us. We've not quite understood why other people find things easier. And then we just, looking at them going, why can't I do such a simple task? Whether it's social interactions, engagement, whether it's just, anything to do with, relationships, friendships, definitely with the social side. And there's a potential there that we know we want to kind of grasp, but we just can't quite get there. And I just wondered, is there anything that you can help with? Because say there is something that we want to do, we want to accomplish, we know that we've got to kind of go out there, maybe do that talk, present something, open ourselves up to new opportunities, but the social anxiety just gets the better of us. How can we, as adults with the awareness of ADHD, now be like, okay, I want to move past this social anxiety and I want to be able to step into my potential? Because also just going into a room and networking, going into a meeting and being the best version of ourselves can be absolutely terrifying. We sort of self-sabotage and be like, no, it's just too much. And we kind of keep ourselves small. We stop ourselves from fulfilling what we want to do. Is there anything, practical that you could offer?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally empathize with all of that. And with somebody who doesn't have ADHD, I've been there as well. And it's quite restricting on your potential. And it's quite, it's sad in a way, but we can be free of that. And there's so many things that we can do. And what I would say is, first and foremost, is tell people, tell somebody you trust, talk about it, be really open. And this is great that you're doing this podcast, because it's an outlet, it's a way of really sharing and making people feel less alone, and knowing that you're not alone, but also setting yourself realistic goals that are achievable. So not setting yourself up for failure, setting yourself up for success. So if it's presentations that you have a difficulty with, or if it's meeting new people, challenge yourself every single day to say, right, today I'm going to talk to somebody new, or I'm going to talk to that person in a queue, not look the other way, or I'm going to say hello to my neighbor rather than run inside when I see them. Or I'm going to share something about myself today with somebody I don't know, or ask more questions. So there's lots of little things you can do like that in terms of building on your social confidence and getting yourself out there a little bit more. So we call that sort of exposure therapy, where you start to do small steps at a time. Then once you conquer those, you can take on larger goals as well. One day where you are standing up in front of a room of people, and actually you feel absolutely fine. But again, there's lots of tools you can use even before those events, like breathing techniques, or how you focus your attention. So people who have difficulties with social anxiety, often even in a social situation, say when they're interacting with somebody, will be focusing on what to say next, or how is that person judging me, or how am I coming across, rather than being in the moment and listening to what the other person is saying. So that conversation opportunity is often missed as well. So they may not come across as well because they're not really listening to the other person. So it's really becoming more mindful of how you are in that interaction, and just taking those small steps to make yourself be more present, and challenge yourself with little goals every single day to talk to somebody. Maybe somebody new. It doesn't have to be somebody new. Just pick up the phone and ring a friend that you haven't spoken to for a long time. Arrange to meet somebody for a coffee. Those little interactions can go a long way.
Yeah, and I think, what, like, socializing doesn't have to be like a one size fits all. If, going to a big party with loads of people is really overwhelming, I just kind of think, well, why should we socialize in that capacity? If we don't want to be drinking and we don't want to be doing that type of thing, like you say, connecting with people who are like-minded. And again, coming back to diagnoses later on in life, is that we have often, felt like, to use sort of the cliche term, a square peg in a round hole. So when you are finally understanding how your brain works, and understanding why, maybe you don't have much to say to neurotypical people, but actually you feel really comfortable in the neurodivergent community, like maybe seek out more connections there. And I see that a lot, that once women are getting diagnosed, they are creating their own communities, that they are niching down in their businesses, they're working with other neurodivergents, and it feels like this more of an authentic connection, which then I think breeds more confidence in socializing, because you're socializing on your terms and socializing in a way that feels right, and also kind of like there's a belonging there, as opposed to kind of pushing yourself into areas that just have always felt difficult, have always felt like anxiety breeding or building. So in a way, it's quite liberating to have the diagnosis, because then we're able to socialize and be the person we want to be without kind of shutting ourselves down. So yeah, I mean, I think your techniques and your tips are really powerful. Can I ask a little bit, because I know you work with trauma,
Mhm.
and very much we hear people, having traumatic events throughout their life being undiagnosed because they've not been able to understand themselves, understand why certain things have happened. Perhaps they've been in relationships with narcissists. There's a lot of people pleasing, perfectionism. There's been, again, the social side of feeling ostracized. And you don't always have to have, traumatic events like huge big T traumas to feel like we've gone through trauma. Can you explain a little bit about how people may feel they've had trauma in their life, but more with a small t, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, trauma is very individual to a person. So if somebody feels that they've been through something which is traumatic for them, then that's trauma. It doesn't need to have it doesn't have to be something very big. For example, it can be witnessing somebody being bullied. It can be witnessing emotional abuse in the home. It could be growing up where you weren't physically abused yourself, but your mother was bullied by your father. So that might be considered as a little t, but that's actually a big T to somebody because that's traumatic. That in itself is trauma. So trauma is very complex, and I think it's very individual. So yes, there are certain big ones, like being in a car crash or, witnessing certain acts of crime. Being homeless, witnessing poverty, growing up in a poor environment, not having access, being abandoned, etc. But little t's are, things like, I mean, bullying, I wouldn't say is a little t. And no trauma is a little t. If somebody feels traumatized, it's trauma. There's no size around it. Trauma is trauma, just like pain. Pain is pain. So even bullying is trauma. So many people go through life being traumatized and not realizing it or putting a word against it because again we've been conditioned to not talk about certain things or just get on with that. Why is that traumatic? That's not traumatic. But actually, if it really affects you at your core where you feel like you don't belong, you haven't been seen, you haven't been validated, then that is a traumatic experience. If you haven't had access to support or a supportive network around you or a loving family, anywhere where you have felt any situation where you have felt alone or have had to suffer in silence on your own, the chances are there will have been trauma around that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's so validating for people to hear this because, they may have been in situations where it has been dismissed or they feel like there's been gaslighting, and I think maybe just not being seen as who you are. I'm just interrupting today's episode because I want to let you know about a brand new workshop that I am planning. It's called Tapping Into Your ADHD Gold, and it's happening on Tuesday, the 14th of March at 12 p.m. UK time. Now, I speak to so many of you, and so many of you tell me that you feel like there's unfulfilled potential, that if you'd known about your ADHD, you would have done things differently. And now, with this new diagnosis, we see life and our desires through a new lens. I want to help you tap into that goal that has always, always been there. And sometimes with ADHD, we don't know how to get out of our heads. We do often come to a point of self sabotage. And I really want in this workshop to help guide you through those limiting beliefs, those old stories that have been holding you back, the knowledge that you didn't know that was there, and help you come out of that stuck loop into those amazing desires, incredible ideas that you have, and get them into action. Now, this can be about your career, this can be about your lifestyle, it can be about anything that you want to start living to that full potential. So if you are interested, this is a new way of working with me. This is a 2-hour workshop, by the way. So we will have a break in between, but this is going to be quite deep, powerful work. We're going to be going into the old beliefs, the old stuff, and we're going to clear and we're going to release. We're going to use some EFT. We're going to really get into the nooks and crannies of what you believe has been holding you back. And then we're going to start using some really powerful visualizations, manifesting desires, talking about the things that we want, and really coming up with an action plan, practical steps and ideas. So this can be anything with regards to a business, anything entrepreneurial, but it can also just be about changing your life now you understand your ADHD brain better. And included in this price, I'm offering an accountability live group session with me the week after. So this is going to be another hour with me, really going into the practical steps. Maybe you've got some questions, maybe you want to bounce some ideas off with the other group members and really get you over that line. So it's called Tapping Into Your Gold. It's on the 14th of March. It's 12 till 2. And then the week later, it's just going to be an hour. So that's 3 hours with me. Go onto my website, adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk, or head to the show notes and all the details are there. Also, I hear from, women again who are sort of in their 50s and 60s being diagnosed, and their whole life is now making sense, but then they have to go through a process of grief, of piecing it all together and piecing like the what ifs and all the things that perhaps, could have been different. Would you say that is, there's a validation there of going through your life and kind of realizing that there has been traumatic events? And I guess what do people do when they discover that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's part of the healing and recovery process that at some point you do have to sort of dig into your childhood, into your past, and understand those wounds, where they've come from, which do shape your behavior, shape your experiences. But it also gives you that understanding of those light bulb moments. This is why I'm like this, or this is why I behave like this in certain situations. And it's that self acceptance when you get to that place of, well, this is me, this is who I am. And you get to that self acceptance, it's almost like you can find it in yourself to forgive those people that wronged you, that labeled you, or because that's all they had at that time, that awareness or knowledge wasn't there. So if you can get to that place, that can really help in your healing and in your recovery. But that might take some time, to unpack all of that, and depending on what you've been through and what support you have. But I think it's really important, and it's possible for people to go through that process and really come out a lot better and stronger for it as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a healing process, isn't it? And it's really being able to lean into, like you say, the stuff that can't be changed. We can't change our past, and we can't change all the resources and the knowledge that people had in those days. And who knows what we're going to be discovering in 10 years' time, even just the knowledge and the insights of ADHD in women over the past couple of years, since I was diagnosed. When I was diagnosed 2 years ago, I felt shame, there was stigma, there's taboo. I mean, I'm only just feeling comfortable talking about it in sort of social situations. I was so embarrassed. I was like, how have I got ADHD? Like, how's this only just been discovered? And, breaking the stigma down for myself of it being, lazy, disruptive, talkative, disorganized, like all the words that you have heard over the decades of hearing about ADHD in boys and I guess kids, it did have an impact. So just having a diagnosis of ADHD, just to be able to sort of sit there and kind of recognize, actually, it's big.
Yeah.
And some women feel hugely at peace with it and validated. But I know that a lot of other women do struggle with the process of the diagnosis. And also, I think the trauma of waiting, like the moment the waiting lists are just so long. And I hear from a lot of women who are like, finally, I've realized what's been going on for me. But actually, I now have to sit for 3 years of doubting myself and going backwards and forward. Like, I'm waiting for the diagnosis. But for them, the self-diagnosis isn't enough. They need that sort of stamp, that approval from a doctor.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I try and, I've got a community of women, a membership, and I try and say to them that you don't have to have had that doctor's, diagnosis. If you are relating to ADHD, if you feel that the self-diagnosis is enough for you, you're reading and you're understanding and you're thinking, that's me, that is enough for you to be able to come and ask for support. It's enough to ask for the resources and connect with other people. So yeah, I think this whole conversation is very helpful, but also really validating. Can I ask, from a personal perspective, what made you want to write a book about social anxiety? Is it something you've experienced in your life? Is it something just you see a lot of in your practice?
It's both, Kate. So it's something that I really struggled with as a child, right through to my teens, quite bad because I was bullied and I didn't feel like I belonged. I'm obviously a woman of color, so I faced racism. So again, I didn't feel like I belonged. So it's going back to that not being seen, not being validated, not feeling like you belong. So that's what's, I know where it stems from. So that really had an impact on me and how I um, avoided social situations because I just felt like I wasn't good enough and I don't belong. So that's partly why I really wanted to write it, because in my practice, I'm seeing a lot of it now more than ever, particularly since the pandemic. If you think about it, we've been told for 2 years not to socialize, not to see people. Imagine what impact that's having on people's fear and anxiety levels. So, social anxiety is huge at the moment, not just with young people, but also with adults. And I'm seeing it so much more. And a lot of therapists are. And based on my own experience as well, I just thought, I've overcome it, I've got through it. And I wish I had a book that I could turn to where I didn't feel alone, and I sort of had something to read that was comforting, that made me realize that actually this is quite normal. A lot of people go through this, and there are things that I can do to help myself. That's why I wrote it, and so far, I mean, it's been out since the 8th of September, and it's really, really helping people a lot, which is great because that's what it was designed to do.
Yeah, I mean, do you sometimes feel that despite being the expert and you've written the book, do you sometimes feel, those warning signs kick back in, or maybe something, that reminds you of being, the feelings of being either bullied or ostracized or not feeling like you fitted in? Does that sometimes kind of creep back in and you have to kind of do a bit of a check-in?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, Kate, with trauma, when you've experienced trauma, anything can be a trigger for it. And if you haven't healed from it, then, or it can still linger around as well. So, yeah, sometimes, if I'm going into a social situation that I'm not certain of, those thoughts can pop up. Like I may feel a little bit triggered, like, oh, but then I have the tools and techniques now and the wisdom to break out of that cycle. So it will hopefully never get to what it was like when I was a child. I've not been in that place. But yes, we are human after all. So no matter how much work we do on ourselves, there are going to be times when we might feel a little bit triggered, and that's okay. But if we've got those tools in place, we can do things to manage that and have better outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, one of my tools is, I mean, I use EFT all the time, and I'm an EFT practitioner. So whenever I feel triggered or I feel that social anxiety kick in, I just do a little bit of tapping. And I've had many clients who've come to me for public speaking, and we've done a session or two, and it always goes back to childhood. It goes back to either being ridiculed in class, or a teacher shutting them down, or being bullied, something small, or something happening in a Christmas show and they felt the audience was laughing, and then we go back and actually the situation wasn't as big or as bad, as awful as we'd kind of conjured it up in our heads. But
Mm.
sometimes, like you say, we sort of store it. It's like a memory bank that sometimes we think we've healed from or we've processed, and then a situation will occur and it will takes us straight back, to being 8 years old, feeling really vulnerable. And I have it still. So I go back and I just do some tapping. But another technique I use, which I don't know if it's a CBT technique or something else, I just literally talk to myself out loud, and I give myself a bit of a pep talk, and I call myself Kate. I'm like, Kate, you have this, you know what you're talking about. I tended, not so much anymore, but before my diagnosis, I used to put people on a pedestal. So anyone that had more education, more qualifications, and anyone that had any form of degree that was bigger and better than mine, I'd be like, well, they know far more than I do. And what have I got to say? I've got nothing to say apart from, you know, I used to just be so intimidated. And now I'm able to put that into perspective and understand that life wisdom, and that we're all, on the same even playing field. So I give myself a little bit of a talk. And then also someone I heard say, and I can't remember who, but they said that our bodily sensations, we we feel like the nervousness and the anxiety and that, stomach churning and all the things that we fear when we're in that kind of very scary place of anxiety can often be reframed as excitement. So if we're really passionate about something and we really want, especially I know that with people with ADHD, if they are working in something they're passionate about, they will go hell for leather with it. It's like a bit of a hyper focus. And so if we have that passion and that excitement, we can kind of, give ourselves a bit of a talking to and reframe it. Is that a CBT technique? Like maybe you can make it a bit more refined than what I've just done.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can reframe. So what you've described there essentially is stress. So stress can either be positive, toxic, or we all need a bit of positive stress to get us motivated and excited and get things done. So if you reframe it as this is positive stress, I need this stress in my body. So my fight, flight, freeze response has been triggered and I'm feeling that churning in my stomach, the nervousness, but this is positive stress because I need to get things done and I'm really passionate about it. So yeah, you can reframe it in that manner for sure as well.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, when you're about to go on a roller coaster, and I mean, I personally hate roller coasters, but I know that people, they sit there and they can see the huge dip and that like fear and excitement in their body. And it kind of sometimes feels a bit hard to decipher. But, we've put ourselves on that roller coaster because we want to experience the hit of the dopamine and all of that, the adrenaline. So I guess it's trying to really break it down a little bit and understand, if we've got to a place where we are, just say you're doing a TED talk, you're really passionate about what you want to talk about. Yes, it's terrifying, but the end goal, the achievement that we're going to get from that, the social situation of putting ourselves out there or meeting new people can often outweigh all the fear and the dread and the worry and the what ifs.
So for example, just going back to that, if you were, say you're invited to a party, if your thought is, oh my God, nobody's going to like me, see the thought process and the feelings that are going to follow. You're going to not want to go, you're going to dread it. But if you reframe that thought to, oh, I might meet somebody new, that excitement feeling is generated, that process. So you can actually literally shift gears in that manner as well.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you work with, do you work one-to-one? Do you do group work? How do you work? And how can people find you?
Yeah, I do one-to-one. I do group work as well, and I do presentations, workshops, and people can find me on Instagram, although that's a little bit not so worky, but that's fine. It's Mita Mystery there, and I'm on Twitter at Mita Mystery. But again, I don't know where Twitter's going these days with the new takeover. So
yeah. Well, I will make sure that we've got the link in the show notes, and just remind people what the name of the book is if they want to go and buy it.
Called How to Understand and Deal with Social Anxiety. It's published by Summersdale and it's available in Waterstones, Urban Outfitters stores around the country, and it's available to order on Amazon as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mita. It's been fascinating and it's been, I hope, a very helpful conversation for lots of people.
Hope so too. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I hope you found what you were looking for in this conversation and it's helped guide you towards some further self-healing, self-exploration, and most importantly, self-acceptance. And if you have enjoyed this conversation and would like to experience more of my work, such as access to exclusive live workshops and opportunities for group coaching sessions, connecting with other like-minded women, and a general feeling of belonging, please come and check out my monthly membership, the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Collective. I've made it as affordable as possible, and I offer you lots of resources and opportunities for connection and support from other women all around the world being diagnosed with ADHD later on in life. I'd absolutely love to see you there. All the details are in this episode's show notes or on my website, adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. See you in the next episode.